All right. So my name is Jeff Moncrief. I'm the field CTO here at Sunry Security. I also run the SE team. And I've been here over 4 years. I came to Sunry from Cisco Security, where I led a team of SEs. And since coming over here, I have been focused full time on visibility and remediating risk across the access fabric in the public cloud and Azure, GCP, AWS. And I have learned a lot. I was quickly humbled when I came over here about what I thought I knew about public cloud security because I was focused on infrastructure as a service. What I really quickly realized was that I was just beginning my journey on understand securing the platform itself across the access fabric. And so fast forward to today, I have learned a lot about what doesn't work, what does work as we've worked with many of our customers. And I do a lot of speaking engagements like this, really trying to help folks learn from our customers' mistakes and then, the school of hard knocks about what we can really do today to try and actually take a bite out of risk across the platform. So we're going to talk about, again, one of my favorite topics, and we call them zombies here at Sunry Security. And we're going to talk about what does a zombie mean? What is that? It's kind of a cool, neat term, but there's a lot of real scary things and risks that make up the zombie threat landscape, if you will. And then we're going to talk about some ways that you can try and get some visibility into zombies, different tactics to try and manage them, and whether that's native tooling, custom tooling, or third-party tooling. So should be a pretty good conversation. All right. So what makes up a zombie? So a zombie is really an all-encompassing term for all kinds of identity-based artifacts that are left out there in your public cloud environment, okay? What am I talking about? I'm talking about an instance profile on an EC2 instance. I'm talking about service principals and managed identities in Azure. I'm talking about roles and service accounts in AWS and GCP, tokens, access keys, right? Machine identities, we sometimes call these non-person identities, non-human identities, just depending on who you're talking to, but we're all talking about the same thing. It is cyber litter and cyber garbage that is left over from projects past and teams past. And it is a huge, huge problem for any sort of brownfield environment where you've been deploying workloads and deploying applications for years in different cloud environments, as well as greenfield environments where you're deploying things with infrastructure as code and things like that on an automated basis. But as time goes on, through attrition, turnover, and the needs of the business might change, all these things start to accumulate and get left behind, and they are very, very risky to the business. All right. What we have learned here at Sunry is the vast majority of the identities when we plug into a customer environment are non-person identities. And the vast majority of those are unused, sometimes to the tune of greater than 50%, sometimes approaching 70, 80% of the identities that we illuminate and expose, we learn through analytics, they're not used. And it's an incredible amount of visibility and awareness. Just, that there's this threat landscape out there that constitute all of these unused identities. But it is a very, very daunting task we've learned about what to do about it and how to fix it. That's a conversation we have every day with folks, okay? Why do zombies matter? I'll tell you why they matter, all right? I don't care if you're using a CSPM tool or a CNAP tool, or maybe a native tool that's going to show you really scary attack paths across the access fabric, right? They're going to show you things like this instance profile attached to this EC2 instance. It has a trust relationship with another role in that account. Well, that role has a trust relationship in another account, this production, that allows it to jump from that identity into the other and assume it. And that gives it a whole other set of credentials and rights and permissions and access to data, right? What we've learned over the years is that you see those attack paths and the vast majority of the hops are unused. It's true. You've got unused roles, unused instance profiles, and you're like, well, where did they all come from? Well, They came from, back in the old days of before things like Entra ID and AWS Identity Center for single sign-on. We just said, well, you're going to want to put all of your users in groups, and those groups are going to assume a role because that's going to help you streamline permissions. And that's great. That led to role proliferation. And then folks started using third-party tooling for security, for business operations, and for different purposes in their public cloud. Every one of those third-party tools needed a third-party trusted role so that they could come in and do whatever the business needed that particular tool to do. What we have found is the vast majority of those are also left behind. And it just creates this landscape of identities that are ripe to be assumed. Doesn't matter if it's something like a POP workload and an instance profile attached to it, or if it's the latest GitHub data exposure with compromised identities. All of these things, these artifacts that are out there are turned on, they're enabled, and they have all kinds of rights and permissions to do things that are nefarious and dangerous in our cloud environments, right? But why are they also challenging to manage? It's because we can't just say, hey, listen, you have 4,000 unused identities out there. You need to go delete them. All right. We recently plugged into an environment here with one of our prospects where they knew they had a problem. And we're monitoring over 860 AWS accounts for them. They have 49,000 zombies. Okay. So just to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like in reality, right? But we can't say you need to go delete these 41,000 because what they're going to do is they're going to say that's impossible. That's impossible from a man-hour standpoint. That's impossible from an investigative standpoint. It is so hard for us to go delete identities. And it's because you don't know what's going to happen when you delete those identities. And even if you were to try and restrict every one of them instead of deleting them, it becomes an almost impossible task for you to manage at scale, pushing out individual policies, adjusting those policies as those different identities might need to be leveraged, right? And it creates a very, very almost impossible task of cleaning up the mess, okay? Now, why are they so hard to clean up? It's because there is this, and this is something I've seen firsthand over and over and over the years. When it comes to telling someone that you have to go delete a bunch of unused artifacts that are out there in the cloud, that you do not know who created them, why they were created, and whether or not they're needed in the future, there is a level of fear and paralyzation that comes across folks. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to put their job on the line or in jeopardy because they deleted this critical role with this critical service principal or service account that's only needed once every 6 months or once every 9 months, and they just don't know, right? You've got your tooling telling you that it's not used. You feel accurate in that tooling, but you're still scared to delete it because that's going to be on you, right? And we've been there, done that. We worked with a customer years ago that used our tooling to show that we had unused identities that we were illuminating their environment. And what did they do? They used our tool as it was designed to do to delete one of those identities. A week later, we got a call because their critical voice over IP application that they rarely use to configure the VoIP system in their retail stores, it wouldn't work. And it was because it did indeed rely on that critical identity that hadn't been used in 6 months. So that's case in point as to why folks are scared, right? But it's still, you can't ignore it. And I think that's kind of the scary thing that I've seen over the years is that folks, more often than not, and this is the truth, more often than not, they just accept the risk. They say, I don't want to break anything. I can't go manually research thousands of identities and figure out whether or not they're needed and delete them. So I'm just going to accept the risk because we just don't have time for this. Oh, and even if you do manage to research several thousand identities, or in that one case, 49,000 that I mentioned, by the time you get that done, the problem has remanifested itself, right? Things that were being used that are no longer needed, a new set of artifacts that are out there. So it's just a problem that it feels up until recently that you just cannot win at tackling zombies. Okay. It's not hard to find that you have a lot of zombies out there, a lot of unused things. Okay. There's native tools. This is a screenshot from AWS. There's third-party tools, across the CSPM, the CNAP, the CIEM realm, where somebody's been playing for many years now and kind of leading the charge. But the bottom line is that it's not hard to have analytics out there at this point in time with the maturity of the market showing you that you have all of these unused identities that are out there. Okay. And there is a way that you can think about combating this without saying that you have to go delete everything. Okay. The alternative is to say, you don't have to delete all of this stuff. Just go take all of its access away. Go take its rights away. Okay. So you didn't delete the identity. You just took its permissions away and gave it a deny all statement. Okay. You didn't literally remove the entitlements. You just put something above it that said deny all, right? So almost like an SCP or something like that, where you put in place a rule that says none of these different identities can do anything. Okay. Great in theory, right? Because you've essentially neutered all of those different identities and they can't really do anything. But it is very, very tedious and manual to go and figure out where all of those identities are that are not being used, and then to come up with a way that's scalable to do this, to essentially isolate them, right? And do it in a way that's safe and it doesn't break the business if and when those identities are needed for some critical application, when it knows that they need to wake up, so to speak, and use those entitlements. Okay. There's a couple different ways that we can look at this. All right. You can do it yourself. All right. So there's DIY ways to do this. Have at it. Chat GPT, right? Go at it and say, I want to write a script that's going to parse my accounts, look at the analytics, take a look at the last use, pile them up, and let's do something with those. Right. Then you have the cloud services themselves. You've got IAM Access Analyzer, GCP Analyzer. You've got Entra Permissions Management that are out there constantly looking for used and unused permissions with these different identities. Right. And then you have third-party tooling that really is designed to help automate a lot of this and relieve a huge pain point with folks that are attempting to take care of this unused identity mess that's in their public cloud environment. So we're going to talk a little bit about all three. Okay, the first one here, and this is an actual screenshot of a Python script. Okay, you can do something like this very easily and quickly in ChatGPT. We can say, listen, let's write a script that's going to go out there and pull all those different metadata data points about the identities, about when they were last used. A lot of folks don't need to know this, but you don't necessarily have to have an entire, CloudTrail or Azure Activity Log or Stackdriver log analytic solution just to go pull the last used data point on a lot of these different identities. A lot of that last used information is sitting there right there in the metadata on the individual person or non-person identity itself in the cloud provider, right? So you could write a script that could go out there, get all the different accounts or subscriptions or projects, enumerate all the different person and non-person identities. Okay, it's not ambiguous if you know what you're talking about here. You've got 5 or 6 different things that you're looking for, and each different account, project, or subscription, and then figure out which ones haven't been used in 90 days, which ones haven't been used in 6 months or a year. Okay, so you get that data point, and then you can then attach a denial on it. Okay, it doesn't have to be AWS. I know this is an AWS scenario here, but it can be kind of the same scenario in all of the 3 cloud providers where you just attach that denial. That will quickly remove a lot of that risk. Okay. Problem is that it's static and inflexible. What are you going to do tomorrow when you need to use one of those identities and you don't have something that's governing the denies, right, on some application team or biz team that you're not talking to and you're not, sitting there next to on a day-to-day basis, right? It's very, very inflexible, but there's a way to gather the information and begin to take chunks out of that risk landscape without having to delete everything. At least now you can start to say, we didn't delete anything. And if you need that identity back with that particular entitlement, we can just go make an exception with the denial. Okay. It is manual. It is by hand, hard to do at scale, but it's possible. Okay. Then we have the cloud native tooling. All right. The cloud native tooling is things like, what about IAM Access Analyzer? Well, IAM Access Analyzer or Entra ID or GCP Policy Analyzer, they do a great job of telling you that you've got these identities, person and non-person, that are used or unused. They're not used. There you go. You need to go delete that identity, right? Or they're going to tell you that you've got a bunch of overprivileged identities that you need to get to least privilege. And they're going to recommend least privilege policies that you have to go attach to every single one of those identities, right? That is a super, super common scenario because we provision identities without really understanding the full breadth of the permissions that they need, but more importantly, the permissions that they do not need. So you almost always have to right size identities after you provision them, either manually or through infrastructure as code, things like Terraform, CloudFormation, et cetera, up into the cloud. But at the end of the day, that's still a manual process. Okay. No, they're not a zombie technically because they are living and breathing and they're doing things, but they're always overprivileged. But you've then got to go attach by hand a least privilege policy to those identities. And that is very, very time consuming. You think zombies are numerous? If you've got 5,000 zombies, you've probably got 20,000 other identities that are overprivileged and need right sizing. And that is also a very, very daunting task because you're focusing on a onesie twosie basis on each one of these different identities. And you still have the same problem as zombies. What if something changes? What if one of those identities does need an extra permission, right? You've got a lot of manual work that you now have to maintain, but it's possible. All right. Then we have the third solution here, third-party tooling. Okay. This is tooling that is starting to emerge in the market right now that's really specially designed to help folks get to least privilege for the first time ever at scale and quickly. All right. It's tooling that's designed to illuminate the problem, let you know that you have this X amount of unused identities that are out there. And I'm telling you, it doesn't matter who we work with. They say that those environments are clean. When we plug into prod, we always expose skeletons in the closet. Okay. So, I mean, we worked with an organization, right? That's one of our existing customers and one of our customers for years. We recently plugged into one of their newer environments. They said it was clean. They don't have any issues, whatever. They're always at least privileged. We plugged in and we found 5,000 zombies. It was an interesting conversation. There was that awkward pause, if you know what I mean, when we were speaking with them of, oh no, we didn't realize it. It's because you have hundreds of accounts. It's impossible unless you have something that's designed to illuminate this. But then after the illumination, you have to have the capability, as we've been talking about, to isolate. And this is where we talk about quarantining. Okay. Quarantining is essentially putting these different identities in jail. All right. It is an orchestration capability that is purpose built to put these identities in jail, but it stays flexible because it allows them to wake up and it allows them to be granted back the permission that they might need to function in a matter of seconds with a nice set of approvers using chat operations with Slack and Teams and things like that. So that if one of these zombies wakes up, you can quickly approve it the moment it tried to wake up and do something, and no one knew the difference. Nobody was impacted. The business wasn't impacted. You're good. But up until that point in time, all the risk associated with that identity was mitigated because it was put in identity jail. All right. Now, what if it wasn't supposed to wake up? That would be a net new capability for you. It would be an indicator of compromise because it being quarantined, it was blocked by purpose-built tooling. All right. So it couldn't wake up. And you have that capability where you just got alerted to a possible indicator of compromise, which would be attributed to something like a compromised credential. It could be something like an identity attached to a virtual machine that someone tried to manipulate, use, maybe generate enumerate roles, assume roles, basically doing lateral movement, right? We talk about that lateral movement chain that I mentioned in the beginning, trying to essentially exploit it. Well, you can't exploit it when everything's been quarantined and isolated. That's the beautiful thing. Okay. So how do we do this? I'm going to spend a few minutes telling you about the world's first cloud permissions firewall. Okay. It's not going to be super salesy, but I want to show you how we can actually take a bite out of this risk for the first time ever. Okay. Now, we get out of here. We will get into the demo. And this is a live demo system. All right. Let's see here. Let me change orgs. to my sales engineering org. Now, this is the Sunray Cloud Permissions Firewall. Okay, again, this is not a sales pitch. I'm showing you how we can actually fix this problem with purpose-built tooling. I mentioned that we've been doing this for years here at Sunray with exposing things like over-permissioned identities, unused identities, lateral movement chains, privileged escalation scenarios, third-party trusted access that's been abandoned and orphaned, confused deputy scenarios, all these crazy identity risk scenarios, right? What we've learned over the years with the folks that we've worked with is, yes, we do a great job of that checkbox of showing them a bunch of problems, no different than a CSPM tool or a CNAP tool or even the native tool that we talked about would show them. At the end of the day, they're staring at a bunch of things that these tools are illuminating, exposing. They came to us and they said, we fixed the mess, right? We can't do this by hand. It's too much. And so about a year ago now, we went back to the drawing board and we're like, there's got to be, like, the market's approaching this incorrectly right now from a remediation standpoint, not from a visibility standpoint. There's got to be a better way to attack this, all right? And so what we did was we came up with this permissions firewall. We leveraged our analytics, but we said, we're going to build a solution that's all about action. Think of it as a hammer to take a bite out of all these unused things that are out there, permissions, but more importantly, identities, okay? And it plugs in like a traditional CSPM tool might, with just a role, and it illuminates what we call the unused permissions attack surface. Folks don't realize this, but you've got to think of the identity fabric. IAM, Azure Active Directory, Entra ID, whatever you want to call it. If you're not thinking of it like a network, you're doing it wrong. Because the adversaries, they know that they can manipulate, maneuver, and exploit the access fabric the same way they would a network. It's the same kill chain. It's the same plan of attack. It's the same objective. The conduit, the plumbing with which they traverse is different, though. We're not talking about a firewall, a next-gen firewall that's blocking 65,000 TCP ports. We're talking about this purpose-built solution here that's designed to block 42,000 permissions across 3 different cloud service providers. We treat those permissions the same as we would a network port, with permits and denies. But we do it in a way that's safe and flexible and doesn't hurt the business, okay? We plug in, we expose this 14 right here. This is going to be least privilege. We can say, listen, instead of you having to go write 14 least privilege policies, you can just click this button right here, and we're going to protect those identities instantly. You don't have to go write any JSON. It's going to go protect them, monitor, give them permissions that they do need to function from a sensitive perspective, and otherwise, they're not going to have dangerous permissions associated with them. And if one is needed, it's going to trigger a chat ops message. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. More importantly, subject matter of today, the zombies, okay? You can see here that, like in this particular production environment, we're showing you identities that haven't been used in 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year. You can see that they're person identities and non-person identities by the little icons here, person or robot. And with a click of a button, you could quarantine one individually, or more importantly, you could quarantine entire chunks of these. And I'm talking about removing huge amounts of risk across the attack surface when you do this. And remember, this is a lab environment. The customers that we work with, anywhere from 5,000 to 49,000 is what this looks like after a day of being plugged in. It's drastic, scary, okay? But it's not 5,000 or 49,000 things you have to go do. It's one, and you don't break anything, because what it does is it puts it in identity jail. We put in a nice layer of orchestration in the public cloud environment using native tools that essentially says these 97 identities cannot use the entitlements that they've been granted unless this purpose-built tool, the firewall, allows it, okay? And then we've got unused services and regions. That's pretty self-explanatory. Folks are tired of writing SCPs by hand. We take all of that pain off of them, and they love it because now you can restrict services and regions with just a click of a button. And it's flexible, and it is very, very scalable. And it's amazing. When you do these couple of things, you click these couple of buttons, that entire risk dashboard for your identity risk across the cloud environment, that red goes all the way to yellow and green very, very quickly because you remove so many risky conditions that this is all associated. Now, we're going to show you what this looks like when a zombie tries to wake up. Okay, because remember, it's one thing to be able to quarantine the mess, but the real magic is in what do you do when that identity is needed. Okay, you'll notice if I go into the quarantine list here and I go to production, I've got an identity that I have quarantined in production. Sneaky Joe. I don't know if Sneaky Joe's needed. I don't know who created it. It's that classic use case, but I'm scared to delete it because I don't know if it's needed. But I want to remove the risk of it being used. So I just put it in quarantine. Done. I don't have to worry about it anymore, right? Now, tomorrow, Sneaky Joe here tries to wake up. Okay, this is Sneaky Joe. Okay, we're going to pop over here. We're going to sign out. And I'm going to show you what it looks like when Sneaky Joe tries to do something. I'm going to sign in. And you can see immediately we're getting access denied. I'm going to try and go into EC2. Look at all of the access denied. Okay. Sneaky Joe is quarantined. He's not supposed to be able to do anything, right? But what happened in real time, the moment that Sneaky Joe woke up was through a Slack app. There's a Cloud Permissions Firewall Slack app as well as a Teams app. There's an approval message. Okay, the zombie, Sneaky Joe, in the account that we just tried to access it in, which has been quarantined for 0 days, has attempted to perform EC2 describe instances, just a basic list or describe command. Okay, this activity has been blocked pending your approval. Do you want to approve it? Yes or no? This is it trying to wake up. Now, was Sneaky Joe supposed to wake up? No, absolutely not. Well, we blocked it. Okay, so you get that net new capability from an indicator of compromise standpoint. But if it is needed, maybe it's that critical voice over IP application that I told you about. You just click approve here. Okay, and then Sneaky Joe, if it's a person, will get an actual Slack message letting them know. But if it's not going to happen because it's a non-person identity. But you can tell whoever attempted to use it or whichever infrastructure as code was related to it. You could tell that individual to go retry, and there you go. Here you can see that all the errors are gone. You granted that permission back. And the beautiful thing is that Sneaky Joe is out of the zombie quarantine list here, but you can go put it back in quarantine, or another 90 days from now, whatever you set the threshold to, we're going to recommend it again as a new zombie that you need to go re-quarantine. So it's designed to help you keep the environment that it's monitoring. Very, very slick capability here. Okay. So we will end it here with just letting you know that you can easily do a 14-day free trial of the Sunray Cloud Permissions Firewall. It really is very light touch. 5 minutes to onboard the role, and it really is about an hour of total investment of your time to do the full eval. Visibility through doing the real-time blocking and tackling. And folks, when they see it, they tend to really, really love it, and they realize the pain points that this is designed to help them relieve. So that being said, I wanted to make sure that we left, I know that we're already kind of early on time here, but I wanted to make sure that we left time for Q&A. So AJ, how are we looking?
We're looking great. That was awesome, and some fascinating stuff there. And I always love a good free trial, Jeff. So that's awesome that you all are.
Shameless sales plug, I know, right?
No, I mean that's important though, because there's a lot of FUD out there in our industry. So getting to try out a tool, getting to see how it works, get to feel the user experience, which is so important, right? Because you got it's not just the buyer that is going to use the tool. So you really make sure the other people that are going to use it are getting benefit. We do have a question here in the Zoom. I'll just read it to you. It seems like a really good one for you to dive into. It says here that in the part of overprivileged identities, we advised customers to use, looks like more of a statement than a question. We advise customers to use group-based assignment of permissions and use just-in-time access via Azure PIM to avoid that amount of manual work of removing and adding permissions to identities. All you have to do is re-add that woke up zombie to the proper group to have the permissions added. So I guess they're talking more about kind of what you mentioned before. There's ways to do this on the cloud providers. Obviously, what you all are doing at Sunray is a little bit different, but yeah, I'll let you kind of add some color there.
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's purpose-built tooling for managing human identities. There's just-in-time, there's privileged identity management, privileged account management. There's all these different acronyms, PIM, PAM, JIT, we call it, right? And you're right. If there's a zombie that wakes up and you put in a particular group, that is an absolutely great way to think of it. The other side to think about it is, the other way to think about it is all of that tooling in those scenarios, for the most part, are really referring to human identities. And as if you recall in my Prezzo, the vast majority of what we regulate are existing identities that are out there that are non-person identities, instance profile, service accounts, et cetera, right? And not only the ones that are there now, AJ, but if you think about like Terraform, we work with folks that are constantly pushing. They say, well, we push out all of our identities with Terraform. That's great. You're pushing them out through Terraform, and they're pre-configured, the ways that you want them to be, right? But when they get out there and they get into the running cloud, it's a whole different ballgame, because when they actually start being leveraged, their needs change. The permissions that they did need, maybe they don't need them now. And then maybe that project is long gone and there's nothing out there to clean it up for whatever reason. Maybe things have changed in the Terraform scenario, the state, right? So we're out there governing the running cloud versus, you've got your declarative the way that this should be, that it should be. We're telling you how it actually is in real life and how it's gonna be.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's one thing that stood out to me in your talk, is just thinking about, with identity, context is so important. It's not just about, oh, I only want it this way and that's how it's going to always be, because we know that's not how things operate in the real world. But understanding the full context and then being able to make decisions off of that is huge. Looks like we got a couple questions coming in, which is awesome. So here goes a question. What if a zombie wakes up and needed hundreds of different IAM roles and access needed? Not quite sure if I understand, but I'll give you a chance here, Jeff, if you understand that one.
Yeah. So if a zombie were to wake up, let's just say it's a role. Most people understand what an AWS role is, right? It's not going to then attempt to wake up a bunch of other identities unless it starts to propagate like a lateral movement scenario. Someone is doing recon, someone is trying to actually maneuver through the environment, which would be a whole other can of worms that you got. Now, if they were quarantined, at least you would have all of those permissions that were blocked or denied. Now, if a zombie tried to wake up and attempted to use, hundreds of permissions, that's super rare, right? But again, you're stuck with that same problem. If you've quarantined them by hand, how are you going to grant those hundreds of permissions back? You need tooling that's designed to do that and with a single click, right? The firewall, again, I'm not trying to plug it, but it will do that with a single click. It'll grant one permission back or 100 permissions back instantly. Or it'll do it over the course of a day. If you're doing testing and you're trying to figure out, well, it needs this and it needs this, grant it back. You can time box it, right? You could give it to them for 2 hours, or you could make it perpetual as a permanent exemption.
That's awesome. That level of flexibility and then being able to do that much with one click is huge. Saves a ton of time. Getting the chance to plug it here, Jeff. Someone's asking you a direct question that allows you to plug Sunnery a little bit more. They're saying, hey, there's plenty of IAM tools that help manage identity issues on the cloud. I think all of us in the cyberspace understand that every aspect of cyber is a crowded space. It's just, there's so many tools out there, but the person's asking, what's the differentiator? Why is this tool better than the other ones out there?
Yeah, because all of the other, this is the truth. I've been doing this full time 4+ years. I don't care if you're talking about things like, and I'm just going to start naming stuff. Okay. I don't care if you're thinking about CNAPP tools like Wiz, or you're thinking about CSPM tools like Prisma Cloud or Checkpoint, or any of those other players in the CNAPP CSPM market, or in the KIM market, or the native tooling. AJ, you know what they all do? They give you a bunch of things to stare at. That's the truth. They're not actually designed to fix the mess that they expose. Now, some of them do a really pretty job of exposing the mess as opposed to others. It's great eye candy, amazing charts and graphs and attack path chains. But at the end of the day, you're stuck with hundreds, if not thousands of more things to go fix. This is designed for the first time for folks to stop staring at the problem and to start fixing the problem. And think of this as a hammer. It's designed to come in and remove huge chunks of identity-based risk for the first time safely without deleting anything, and by removing all of that, doing it by hand, which is the only alternative that you have today, is to use the recommendations of all the tools I just mentioned and to go fix it by hand. Go push out a least privilege policy to every single identity, or to go find a way to put every one of those zombies in jail. And it's inflexible, it's manual, it is a huge headache. And that's a pain point that this is purpose built to solve. So it is true. There is no other tool out here on the market that does this. When we were at AWS Reinforce in June, it was fascinating to be on the booth floor because everyone's going around saying, well, how is Wiz different than this, different than this, and different than this? And people come over to us and they're like, no one's doing what you're doing. This is really cool.
Yep.
That speaks for itself.
Yep. No, I love it. I love it. The question here, kind of more tactical here. Does the tool also address the permissions issue with serverless functions? I assume they're talking about things like Azure functions, Lambda functions, and permissions
Yes.
there. But yeah, your thoughts?
100%. Yeah. So any kind of compute with some sort of a managed identity associated with it, you got to think about it like this. Compute is essentially headless in the public cloud without some sort of identity attachment to it. I always call it the identity umbilical cord. Okay. An EC2 instance can't do anything. A Lambda instance can't do anything unless it has permissions from the identity fabric to go do something. And we absolutely monitor all those permissions and figure out if they're needed or not, and can control them if they're not.
Awesome. Awesome. We got a question here, and I'm going to rephrase it a little bit, but they're kind of thinking about justifying, which I think is something that all cyber folks are dealing with nowadays, is just cost of things and justifying how to pay something. And they're talking about, hey, like if I have a ton of accounts, this could be equivalent to maybe like an FTE analyst. And they want to understand, what's the justification for that type of spend with a very tight budget, which I don't think this is related to, solely to Sunry. You've been in this industry for a long time, Jeff. So, these are questions that security people are always thinking about. Like, all right, if I make this investment and if I get this wrong, the board has it. So your thoughts there?
Yeah. So we've got a customer. It's a big fintech customer that we've all heard of. They've been a customer of ours for years. And the statistic that they provided to us was last year, they used our KIM, which was our visibility platform, right? That we've had up until we did a big turn with this firewall. And they used it to take care of 2,000 zombies, unused identities. It took them 10 months, multiple full-time employees to go do this across 2,000 identities because they had to go research. And that takes so much time in order to figure out if they could safely delete them. And then guess what? At the end of the 10 months, the problem had crept back up because they don't stop coming. They don't, right? Their stat to us was this saves them 95% of that time. 95%. Because they don't have to do this. They can just click that button, remove all the risk, and go focus on something else.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's I think a lot about being in that executive position when you're thinking about how do I spend the limited dollars that I have. Those are the
and this is not a costly solution either. It is priced based on account. It is very transparent. It's right on our website, as opposed to $1 million CNAP type scenarios and things like that. This is nothing like that.
Yeah, and you mentioned before, at the end of your session there's an opportunity for people to try it out and to test it out and get some experience with it, which is
just see what the landscape looks like. There's no commitment or anything like that. It only takes like I said, about an hour of your time, and then you can make the decision. Yeah, this would be a wise investment for us, or no, this doesn't make sense. But what we have seen is that it almost always continues, because once they see it, they're like, oh wow, the alternative is us ignoring this or trying to do this by hand.
Yep. Which is, as we think about the landscape that we're in and what you talked about today, it's almost impossible to try to do this stuff manually. And you gave that great example of 10 months of work, and then basically they have to redo the work again because they're not going away. They're going to keep coming back. So It's this is the
I'll
power.
say something really controversial. And I don't, it is what it is. This is based off the School of Hard Knocks. You're talking about any mature public cloud environment where you've got, let's just say, I don't know, anywhere from 80 to 200 accounts. Getting that environment to least privilege is impossible.
Yep, I agree.
It's a pipe dream using traditional methods, we'll call it. Yeah.
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly. It's one of the things that I'm thinking about with this tool. I come from the compliance space,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
always think about how identity is this hidden thing that auditors never dive deep enough into. They never are, they're not going deep enough. And mainly it's because auditors don't necessarily have the tools or the technical resources to go as deep as they need to. So they're kind of just, give me a list of privileged users. But that doesn't really solve the problem that you're thinking about from a compliance perspective. I
Right.
think what you guys are doing with Cloud Zombies is this should potentially become a part of compliance efforts in the future. Or even, SOC 2 reports, one of the cool things about SOC 2 is that you can speak very uniquely in a SOC 2 about what you're doing. So imagine companies out there, if you're thinking about getting a SOC 2, you can speak to Cloud Zombies being evaluated on a regular basis in your security program. That can differentiate yourself from another person, which I think is huge. I see a huge use case for this in the compliance world.
Yeah, and many of our customers over the years, AJ, they've been financial institutions or institutions that have had to be regulated and compliant. So, the tooling up until this point has been a checkbox of, do you have tooling for visibility into over-permissioned identities, unused identities? And that's a checkbox because you have tooling providing visibility into it. Then they're going to ask the question, okay, so what are you doing about it? And that's where something like this comes into place because it's actually helping you prove that you're doing your due diligence to actually remove the risk, not just stare at it.
Right, taking an action versus just seeing it.
Exactly.
Last question here. This person, you hit on this around the free trial, taking about an hour to set up. But as you think about setting up similar solutions out there in the marketplace, how do you compare Sunry's implementation? Easier, harder? The same? What do you think there?
It's super easy. I'm not going to complicate things. All we need is a role. It takes just a few minutes to onboard us through CloudFormation, and then you just sit and wait. And within a day, all the analytics are baked, and you have all those data points. The alternative, again, would be CSPM CNAP tooling that has a very similar onboarding process, has a similar conclusion that we have from a visibility standpoint, but that's where their story stops. And our story really starts is starting to click those disable, protect, quarantine buttons to actually start removing risk.
Awesome. I think that's a perfect way to wrap us up. That's where the story starts for Sunry. I encourage you all on Slack to reach out to Jeff, ping him if you have any additional questions. Jeff, this was awesome. Thank you for shedding some light on cloud zombies that are hidden out there in our systems. It's kind of alarming to realize how much risk these dormant identities pose, but I think your guidance on how to identify and quarantine these threats is super invaluable, and hopefully will help some folks and get some interest in checking out Sunray. So thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.